Hi there. This is Sereno Sky again, reading to you from my novel, Lonely Traveler. Oops, this way. I can see the pic. As I noticed that some people have already finished chapter 4, I wanted to get on with the story so that those interested in following this, listening to my novel, won't have to wait very long for the continuation of the story. So I will jump right into the next chapter, which is chapter 5, and it's called Eclipse of the Soul. The next morning I left quite early to catch the boat to Ibiza. After bidding farewell to the hippies I had been staying with, including Paul. From Ibiza I caught the ferry over to Valencia and continued hitchhiking to Gandia, where I went directly to the place where my friends would usually hang out at that hour. Sure enough, some of them were there. One of them was going to go back to Switzerland in a couple of days on his Vespa roller. He offered me to get on the back and travel with him. I felt that would be great, as I just wanted to get back home to my room at the hippie commune and sort out all my new impressions and thoughts. One of the first things I found out after getting back to our hippie commune was that Carol had gotten involved with one of my friends. We did talk about it a couple of days later, and she explained to me that she felt more secure now in her new relationship, as with me she could feel that I was restless and searching. She was right. My inner search started intensifying. I didn't go around anymore to every smoke in town. I started going more often my own way. My friends, of course, all wanted to know how it was on Formentera, and I shared some of the experiences with them. It was always fun when one of us came back from a trip and shared all that had happened. There was no internet in those days, and very little film or photo material about those places, so one had to gather his information directly in person. It's a fact that the hippies used to live quite primitively in comparison with today's youth. We had no mobile phones, no computers and internet, could hardly afford a good camera. That's why there are so few pictures from the 60s and 70s. We practically couldn't afford those horrendous plane fares, which in those days seemed to be only affordable for the wealthy. So hitchhiking wasn't just a cool thing to do, although many of us looked at it that way, but it was also due to economic reasons, as most of us hippies were actually very poor. After somewhat settling into my life back home, I found some work helping to build a house. There were only 3 of us building it, but since one of us knew what to do, he only needed 2 helpers. So there were the 2 of us hippies helping this professional builder. Sometimes after work, the other hippie and I used to go smoke a joint. It was sort of cool to work with a buddy who was into similar things I was. It made work somewhat easier. It wasn't a big house we were building, so we could see day by day some progress. And in the process I learned a lot about construction. It was hard work too, but it helped me realize that things that were supposed to last a bit needed to be built step by step, making sure it's done well in order to ensure good quality. I spent my free time going to the ashram to meditate or down to the lake to watch the sunset with the other hippies. It was autumn now, summer was over, and I felt that spiritually I was going into a bit of a winter sleep. At that time I wasn't so much into winter anymore and longed for the warm sun and the beaches. It was time to put on my Afghani sheep coat again as the days were getting colder. Sometimes I felt like That coat was the only thing I still liked about winter. Though when winter came, we did take some beautiful walks up in the snow-covered mountains of the Jura, and we usually went into one of those mountain inns to have a special coffee. It had some spirits in it which really warmed me up from the inside. Or sometimes we would even have a fondue, which is melted cheese in hot white wine. I had to take on another job as the job in construction had been put on hold. It was getting too cold to work outside. I ended up taking a job at the watch factory where all completed watches had to be put to the right time. So I had this master clock in front of me to which all watches needed to be synchronized to, hundreds of them a day. This master clock had a second hand, so I could literally count the seconds and see my life ticking away. Winter was hard and somewhat boring, but I really wanted to make some money to get out of there and go to India. I would often think about Anne and our conversations and how much I'd been able to take in from her. She had sent me a postcard from Formentera. The summer's gone, so are you, but you're still in my thoughts and prayers. Thinking about her made me both sad and happy. Sad because I missed having someone like her around, but happy for her that she could be in Formentera enjoying the warm sun. How lucky her boyfriend was to not only have Anne as a companion, but also to be able to paint and sell his paintings and make a living that way. Here I was working at a job where I was literally counting the seconds. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6. Spring Awakening. After a few weeks just before going mad, I found another job cleaning windows, which was a bit more enjoyable, as one could always look out and see the sights. But all in all, it was a difficult and somewhat lonely winter, and I was so much looking forward to spring. It was not clear to me what I was going to do then, but just the thought of spring alone brought on some new hope. I had always loved springtime so much. As temperatures would slowly be rising again, I could see the first tiny little buds on the trees and hear the first few birds slowly daring to chirp a little song of hope that spring might be here soon. They always brought such joy and anticipation to my heart, as spring is sort of an equivalent for the warmer days ahead, spiritually too. The first snowdrops took the risk of cautiously opening their white petals to the first rays of sunshine, hoping they would somehow survive the cold nights, while other spring flowers were still struggling to push their way through the earth in order to come out and see what was going on. There were some cooler days in between again, but on the days when the sun came out, the intensity of excitement grew each time. It wasn't long until the first butterfly was chasing after the sun's rays to keep itself warm. With each sunny day, the irresistible desire for change and freedom seemed to grow, and it didn't take long for all this yearning of nature to climax in a mighty explosion of thousands of birds singing, accompanied by white, yellow, pink, and a diversity of green blossoms bursting out of the trees. At the same time, all kinds of flowers with psychedelic colors were popping out everywhere, so that Mother Earth would be covered and adorned with an incredible beauty. Oh, if only there was such a spiritual awakening among mankind as well. It was around Easter that, along with more sun, more and more hippies would come down to the lake again, playing the guitar, smoking a joint, and talking about life. The normal people would walk by and look at us like we would be some kind of animals in a zoo. The two worlds didn't seem to jive. I still visited my parents sometimes, but it was always hard, as I could see them struggle due to their worries about my future and what I was going to do. I felt sorry for them, but just had to follow that voice in my heart, and there was nobody that would have been able to stop me from doing so. I started having a little bit of money aside from the jobs I had done during the winter, but no idea where to go or what to do. The thought of going to India, Nepal, or Afghanistan kept going through my mind. But at that point, none of my friends were interested in going with me, nor did they have the money. I didn't have much either, and was thinking that for going on such a long journey, I would need quite a bit more, and perhaps also some extra to allow me to come back, in case I wouldn't find there what I would be looking for. Somewhere in my heart, I felt that it wasn't the right time for me to go there. One of the early summer weekends, some of my friends and I took our sleeping bags and some food and went to the top of Mont Soleil, Sun Mountain, in order to spend the night there. That mountain towered high above our city and the lake. From the top, you could see all the way across the rolling hills and farmland until the Alps. Most likely, this mountain may have received its name because of the fabulous sunsets, and it had truly been worth climbing to watch the sun slowly set behind the lake in the distance. I was thinking about how much a sunset takes us into its grip. No matter where it happens, it's an amazing thing. The warmest of colors can be seen just when the sun is close to setting, and the different shimmers of red and orange would remain on the horizon for a long time after the sun itself had disappeared. We had some very good discussions about life that night around the fire. My friend Robert, who lived next door at our hippie commune, was there as well. I had been having quite a few good talks with him lately. We would often walk to the lake together and then have discussions way into the night. What I appreciated about him too was the fact that he was always helping to keep the kitchen clean. I liked people who took on their share of the load, which I thought was an important point when living in a hippie community. He understood my search, though he himself seemed much more settled and knew what he wanted to do. Bernardo, I do understand your desire to go to India. A lot of hippies are going there these days, but you also need to realize that you might not find there what you're seeking. I think for you it seems to be more of a matter of finding the right thing to believe in and what to do with your life, and not so much finding the right place. I felt he had a point, and Anne had mentioned something similar when I had asked her about this topic. The sun had left its glow, leaving a shimmer of red and pinkish light on the snow-covered Alps in the distance. We eventually got tired and lay down in our sleeping bags. I felt very restless that night and wasn't able to sleep. These big questions about my life were haunting me, and I felt I needed to get a grip on something in this restless sea of waves. So I just got up and walked the few meters to the very top and began to meditate and pray, more seriously than ever before. I remembered what Anne had told me when I last saw her. If you really search for it, you will find it. I was trying hard to shut out all my thoughts and hear that still small voice again. And there it was. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened unto you. That sounded pretty good. Hadn't I read something similar in the New Testament a while back? Perhaps it was the same thing. I could check that later. Mind you, I had read a lot of books about spiritual things from different religions, including the New Testament. I had various Christian groups trying to convert me, but I had always told them that I already believed in Jesus. He was a hippie too, I used to tell them. He was so high that maybe he didn't need to smoke weed. You should have seen their faces. They understood me as little as I understood them, and I hadn't found my home with them, as you can imagine. I had noticed too much of a negative view on hippies, whereas I thought that one of the strong points the hippies had was their tolerance, which seemed more in line with what I had read about Jesus. But apart from not being very turned on by the groups I had met or even visited, I had nothing against Jesus and the things he had said and done. I might want to ask him one day about a couple things, and I'm sure he will explain them to me. So I was very encouraged by this voice I had just heard from the stars above, or maybe from the moon that was shining in almost full appearance over the lake, or from anywhere within or without. It didn't matter to me from where, but I had heard it. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened unto you. If this is so, then please just help me and show me, I screamed out into the darkened sky. Don't know if any of my friends who were asleep heard it or not. Maybe not, because I had gone up to this little ledge on top of the mountain to meditate. It didn't take longer than a second after my shout of desperation that everything around turned into light and warm energy, like someone would have turned on a light switch in a dark room. From one moment to the next, the trees and each blade of grass were emitting warmth and the most beautiful shining colors of light. At first, I didn't know if I should be scared or not, as I had never experienced something like this before. Not even on my wildest drug trips. I thought, why should I be scared? It's so beautiful, and I've asked for it. And you should have seen the sky. There was so much light up there that I couldn't even see the stars anymore, with beams of light streaming down. A tremendous inner peace came over me, along with the feeling of assurance that I was in good hands and that everything was going to be okay. I wasn't scared, even though I couldn't feel my body anymore. It was like my own spirit had gone out and was becoming a part of everything around me, part of that warmth and light. I did do some intensive thinking too while all this was happening. Apart from absorbing all those wonderful feelings and intensive energy, the thought came to me, the power behind everything we see in nature is love, and I am part of the same. Somehow, maybe because of the desperation in my quest over the last years, my cry out into the dark had been answered. I felt I had found something major that would forever serve as a reference point in my life from now on. I have heard and read from various people since then who had similar spiritual experiences. This was, of course, life-changing for me, and I knew I had gotten a hold of something that was much deeper than my concept of heaven I had been taught as a child, or at school, or thereafter. I couldn't even integrate that experience into any religious or non-religious concept at all. I have developed a great respect and love for nature and this loving spiritual power that surrounds us. I prefer to think of it as spiritual energy, while others prefer to call it God. but the word God has this sort of connotation of an old man with a long grey beard, and I haven't experienced it like that at all. I have gained great respect for people who made similar spiritual experiences, no matter from which background or religion they come from. The morning following this experience, my friends wanted to go back to town, as such a night up on top of the mountain called for some kind of hearty breakfast. Personally, I was apprehensive about going back to the city, even though I was hungry too. I just felt so scared of losing this newfound feeling and spiritual contact I had made up there. Somehow I felt that there would be no easier place to lose this again than down in the busy confusion. But I realized I needed to go get some food too, as I was not at a stage in my life where I could just stay up there and live off of berries and mushrooms. So, despite it being hard to go back to town, I just had to have the trust that I would somehow be able to retain as much of what I had found. Life went on. I went back to work, whatever sort of work came up, to make some money. I worked at a great variety of jobs, as they were only temporary assignments. This was good for me, as I could sometimes take a break in between one job and the next. At that point, I was once again seriously considering getting ready to go to India in hopes of finding some place that would allow me to stay in that spiritual state I had found. Perhaps to some ashram far away from civilization, where I could just offer my help and labor in the field without needing to go work for money. But until then, I would need to continue acquiring quite a bit more for such a trip. Besides working, I continued with meditation and prayer in order to stay as close as possible to this experience I had had. It was difficult, as the daily humdrum was cutting out so much of this, and coming home tired from a 9-hour job didn't exactly help either. Why would people need to work so much? I asked myself. Some people are out of work, so why don't we just work less and give others an opportunity while we have more time for meditation, prayer, for being creative, and most of all, for talking to each other? I spent the week working, and at the weekends I would often go to one of the autonomous youth centers which some of the cities around had established for their hippies. Autonomous meant these places were run by young people, and that there were no police raids there, and that we could listen to music as loud as we wanted to, and no one cared about where all the smoke in there came from. During that time, my intake of drugs was diminishing considerably. I felt like I had gone much higher than the psychedelic state some of the drugs had taken me to, and that it was becoming a waste to fill myself with more drugs. I still smoked occasionally, but would stay away from the stronger stuff I had taken many times before. I felt those drugs wouldn't bring me to any higher state than the one I had already found. Drugs were a major part of the hippie lifestyle, and for many it wasn't just a new way to escape, like society at large has done for centuries with alcohol. It was part of our spiritual search into our souls and what one wanted to live for and why we were here. I'm not saying that drugs need to be a part of such a spiritual search. I'm just saying that many hippies tried them out as part of their spiritual search, including myself. Since I don't want to be known for misleading people into using drugs, I won't elaborate on it any further. I've seen too many young hippies getting into addictive drugs, and whenever I would see them injecting a needle with heroin or opium into their veins, I always felt very sad that they had decided to slowly end their lives instead of searching for a better world. That was the end of chapter 6, and I wish you a happy weekend.